Er zijn 3 dingen in het leven van een kunstenaar. Ten eerste, te kunnen werken. Ten tweede, goed te kunnen werken. En ten derde, de grootst mogelijke weerklank bij zijn publiek te vinden.
Who's afraid of art? Tyrants and wannabe tyrants, so it seems.
Artist Alexandra Skotchelenko has been sentenced to 7 years in prison by St. Petersburg's invasion, spreading false information.
With autocracy growing, with tyrants on the roll, Balie brings together over 40 international artists, writers and thinkers during Forum on European Culture. We celebrate the subversive power of art and literature and curate works of opposition that preserve the histories autocrats want to erase and imagine the futures they fear.
So my question is, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Art against the tyrants. Not for the faint-hearted.
Yes, good afternoon. Welcome to this program of the Forum on European Culture. My name is Iante Mosselman. I'm the curator of this forum, and I'm honored and really thrilled to welcome one of Europe's most vital literary voices, Ukrainian writer Andrey Kurkov. He has long been a sharp observer of post-Soviet life, and his internationally acclaimed novels, including Death and the Penguin, Grey Bees and the Silver Bone, are known for their dark humor, absurdity and human warmth. But since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Andrey Kurkov turned to non-fiction, becoming a powerful chronicler of the war's everyday impacts. His book Diary of an Invasion, a series of diary entries written during the first year of the war, has since been followed by a second Our Daily War, which continues Kurkov's literary documentation of the war. And I found it so heartbreaking how you write in the end of the second book, how you wished when the book would be finished that the war would be finished, but how it's still raging. There's a live stream, so you're very much invited to ask a question at the end of the program. But please, if you don't want to be on the YouTube channel of the Balie for eternity, lay a little bit low. Thank you for being here, Andrey Kurkov. Maybe just to start, because I was reading the news and there just has been a really, really heavy attack on Ukraine again. And just this week, there have been more than 114 missiles, over 1,270 drones and nearly 1,100 glide bombs. And I wanted to ask you, what is it like for you to be in Amsterdam? Is it easier? Is it more difficult?
Well, to be away is always more difficult. Good afternoon, sorry I didn't say hello. But when you are there, actually you know the dangers and you feel, you are still at home, you feel at home. I mean, the home is under attack, but somehow you adapt your life, your habits to this new style of life. So actually what happens that people in big cities in Ukraine, they don't sleep at all already for more than a year, because every night there are air alerts. Everyone has apps on the smartphones. In big cities you hear from the street the sirens, and then you check the reason for each siren. If it is a drone or several drones or 200 drones, you feel still relaxed, you decide to go to the corridor. If you read that there are ballistic missiles flying, you know that they are very fast. So actually maybe you don't have time to run to a shelter. So you get ready actually to go down into the stairwell, or still you are going in the corridor. But I mean, some people already go to the shelters, and especially if you live next to the house which was damaged or destroyed, then you will more likely to go to the shelter with the first siren.
Why?
Well, because you cannot be afraid 24 hours a day.
No.
You don't function if you are afraid. So you forget about fear. So you know that this can happen, and you react to this only when it happens. And then you decide, depending on your mood also, because I mean, like if you are in a bar when the siren sounds, you think you are safe next to whiskey. And many bars are in the underground spaces, which were built as bomb shelters. I mean, one of my favorite bars, it's called Barman Diktat on Krещатик Street. It is actually ex-bomb shelter with 4 spaces, 1 secret space. And actually it is a favorite bar of the Danish Minister of Defense when he comes to Kyiv.
So you have many conversations with him.
Yeah. I mean, if you just follow the war like you are a target,
yes,
then it's better actually to go away to become a refugee, because you will be destroyed psychologically. If you learn how to not to think about the danger when there is no danger at this moment, then you can function. Because actually, I mean, we have now a new joke that Ukrainians are very flexible. If they are not killed in the morning, then they go to work. And it's true, because I mean, everybody knows that nobody sleeps in Kyiv, and in the morning you have lots of people on the street going to work, and they drink much more coffee than before.
Yeah, of course.
And the coffee is getting more expensive, you know. And you have more people in the queue for coffee in the cafes. So you have to decide
what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And what does it then make it hard to be away?
Well, I mean, our 3 children, they are adult. I mean, they are all the time in Kyiv. They don't want to leave. They don't like to go to our countryside house, which is safer. And actually, I mean, we were today several times on the phone with our older son, with my wife, who is in the countryside. He went today there for 3 days. So in a way, I'm happy that somebody is in the countryside house. I don't know what is my daughter doing, what is my younger son is doing. But of course, actually, when Kyiv is under attack, and I am away, I'm checking who is where and how they are behaving, what they are doing. Yes.
And what do you? Would you rather have them leave Ukraine?
Sorry?
Would you rather have them leave Ukraine?
Well, I mean, in 23, I had been teaching at Stanford for 6 months, and then later in the end of the year for 2 months in Columbia University. And actually, the longer the distance, the more difficult it is actually to exist far away from your home.
Yes.
And for last 26 years, I have been traveling every year, minimum 6 months.
Yes.
So for me, there is a special sort of ritual of returning home.
Yes.
Because, I mean, when people ask, why don't you go abroad? I say, I mean, I spent half of my life abroad.
Yes.
For me, every coming home is like a celebration. I see my family, I see my friends, we go somewhere, we do something, we fill the time with events and actions, and then I go again.
Yeah.
And like when the full-scale invasion started and we became displaced persons on the border with Slovakia, in Uzhgorod, in Zakarpattia, and we came there by car. And I started traveling because I was asked to go to Berlin, to Vienna, to fundraise for the army, for the hospitals. I would cross actually the border with the car and then go by planes usually everywhere. And it became also some kind of a daily routine. I still have a plastic card which allows me free parking at Košice Airport.
Fantastic.
But life changed completely because, I mean, I learned another Europe because of the war. I never went to Slovakia before. I never knew about a small airport in Baia Mare in Romania. And this is a unique airport which works only 2 days a week with free parking, no internet, no Wi-Fi.
And what is if going to all these places in Europe? Was there something that you thought of it before? Did your mind about Europe change in a way?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, I mean, if we talk about in general, actually, I mean, first of all, actually, in the beginning of the war, I was shocked in a positive way by solidarity of Ukrainians, because Ukrainians are individualists; they're not collective. So that's why they were always hated by Russians, because Russians are collective. They like to get together, to drink together, to do something, and they don't have respect for private property in Russia.
No.
In Ukraine, there is a love for your own land, for your own allotment, your garden, your house, and everybody is individualist. So everyone, first of all, defends his or her own space. And there is a space, actually, for each Ukrainian in Ukraine, yeah. And then suddenly, when all... And Ukrainians love to argue about everything. So
You're right about that,
yeah.
yes.
And suddenly everybody was helping each other. Mm-hmm. And this was so obvious and so like striking because, I will tell you one episode, which is probably included in the Diary of Invasion. We went, because on 24th of February, we were woken up by the explosions outside the windows at 5 p.m. Then at 6 p.m. there were 2 more explosions, and people started leaving big cities and small cities going to the west. We don't have highways. We have only one main road, which is not a highway, to Warsaw, to Lviv, and traffic jams were 70 kilometers long, 50 kilometers long, etc. So we didn't go immediately away. We waited for 1 more day, and then we decided to go to our countryside house, which is on the western side of Kyiv. Yeah. And at that time, our children and their friends were in Lviv for a long weekend. So in the end, we decided actually to go. Well, when we arrived in the house, a friend called me and he said, "Where are you?" I said, "We are near Zhytomyr highway, just in our house." And he said, "Get back in the car and drive immediately further west because the Russian tanks are moving in your direction." So we did it. And then it took us 22 hours to get to Lviv, which is 320 kilometers away from our house.
Wow.
But, everybody was on the way. Even in the traffic jam, everybody was so polite to each other and friendly and sharing food and drinks, etc. And then when we arrived and found our children and their friends in Lviv, we saw that the road to Poland, 60 kilometers, is completely blocked. Mm-hmm. In fact, actually, people were waiting to cross the border for a week in the cars. And we decided to go to the Carpathian Mountains, to the border with Slovakia and Hungary. And I didn't have much petrol left, and there was no petrol already on sale along the road. So we got stuck in the night of 26th of February in the mountains. It was minus 15. The traffic jam was about 40-50 kilometers. No hotels. Actually, what happened that, we were 8 or 9 people in the car. And I thought that if I run the engine, I will just lose petrol, and we will not have petrol to get to Uzhgorod, because in Uzhgorod, a friend of ours actually was waiting for us. Mm-hmm. And if I switch off the engine, we will be frozen. So I saw a small motel on the road. I went there. Of course, there were no free rooms, but the guy at the reception, he said, "Well, take this telephone number. This is somebody, a young businessman who lives in the mountains in a village. He bought recently abandoned Soviet tourist hostel in the mountains." So I called him at 1 o'clock in the morning. He picked up. I told him that I have these people, 8 or 9 people in the car, and we are afraid that we will not be able actually to make it until the morning. And he explained me how to get to this hostel. I found the way. We went there. He came from his village. He switched on electricity. He brought blankets and towels. He put us up in 3 rooms. And then he went to this traffic jam, and he brought back to the hostel about 15 or 20 cars with families with kids.
Oh, wow.
So, he didn't want any money. We paid like €5 per person. But this was something incredible.
Mm-hmm. It is
and then
incredible.
in the morning there was no traffic jam. And we went down, we had enough actually petrol to go to Uzhgorod, and we settled in Uzhgorod. And a lady we never met, later in 10 days' time, gave us a key from her apartment, and she moved in with her daughter and her daughter's family.
Just to give you a space.
And I remember, we lived in the Soviet high-rise on Dostoevsky Street. Yes, Dostoevsky Street 4.
Oh, that's so ironical.
Yeah. And there was a Zhiguli, Lada car, old car, parked in front of the house with a message that if you need help, call this number.
Did you call?
No, I didn't need help.
No. Very
By
good.
that time.
Well, actually, what happened to you, for me, really inspired also the theme of this forum, Art Against the Tyrants, because you heard after the full-scale invasion that you were on a sort of list of people that the military really wanted to capture. And that's very interesting, because you are a writer. And I was wondering, why are you, do you think, someone who is so dangerous for Russia?
I think any intellectual in Ukraine is dangerous for Russia. Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, Russian secret services, which is what, it is not KGB, I think it's a very different thing now.
Why?
Well, I mean, KGB was like an axe. So like a manual instrument. You knew how they work. You could see you could see on the street the face of a KGB person.
Yes?
Yeah, because I mean, when I was a student in the Foreign Languages College, we had a department which was responsible for organizing social life of the foreign students. Mm-hmm. I mean, all people who were working there, they were KGB people, they were men, because I mean, generally all the teachers were ladies, and here you have men with same face, almost same face. You cannot remember this face. You saw this face several times, but I mean, no features. Mm-hmm. And the same manner of conversation. Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, FSB and GRU, I mean, the military intelligence, I don't know at all anything, but I mean, FSB we know, because FSB was destroying physically opposition in Russia during 15 years on the order of Putin.
Yes.
So actually, one more actually organization exists on post-Soviet territory with the name KGB. It's KGB of Belarus. Mm. And this is interesting because they kept their traditions.
So you still recognize them.
All the opponents of Lukashenko in 1990s, they disappeared, physically disappeared. They were never found. So this is the old KGB. Mm-hmm. The new FSB, the new secret services, I mean, they want to do everything public so that to make people afraid, to frighten them, to force them to escape as far away from Russia as possible.
How did they do?
Many people who fled from Russia, actually, they were given 24 hours or 48 hours to escape. Otherwise, they were told directly that they will be imprisoned for 15 years or for 20 years.
And why give them the 24 hours? Why not just imprison them?
Well, because they don't have so many spaces in the camps, in the prisons. I mean, they have already thousands and thousands of people who posted wrong things on Facebook and were imprisoned. And of course, they don't want, I mean, they have no reputation, but they are still worried that if they do too much bad things, then the reputation of Russia will be even worse.
Can it? Can it, though?
Well, I mean, in my imagination, yes, it is possible.
Okay. I'm asking you about the intellectuals because of something you write about. And you have stressed many times that it is not only a war about territory, but this is a war about language, and it's a war about the erasure of culture. Can you tell me about this?
Well, I mean, the war is run on three levels, this war. So, I mean, if we talk about the ground level, the war for the territory, it's a new phase of the old war. Because the old war was won by Russia in 1921. This was the previous war to get all of Ukraine occupied and turn it into the Soviet Republic. On the middle level, this is a new, old war against Ukrainian identity, because actually Ukrainian identity is what is forcing Ukrainians to defend their territory. Because for Ukrainians, actually, I mean, their territory is not just territory of their country. This is territory of their freedom. And historically, freedom is more important for Ukrainians than stability. Because Russia was always a monarchy. If you live in the monarchy, you become a loyal or disloyal subject, but I mean, you are afraid to be, singled out So I mean, you behave like everybody else. If everybody else wants to kill the Tsar because he is bad, you go and you kill the Tsar. And then you wait for the next Tsar because next Tsar should be better. You don't think that you should change the system. You don't have this imagination. Yeah.
And everybody is fully focused on the Tsar.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, every Russian, even the Russian Democrats, they have the same image of great Russia in their head.
Yeah.
Ukrainians, they have 42 million of different images of Ukraine, because every Ukrainian builds his own Ukraine inside his garden, inside his house, inside his flat, sometimes using illegal means for that. Because, I mean, he wants to live in a happy Ukraine when his neighbors are not able yet to create their own happy Ukraine. So, I mean, you have millions of different Ukraines, and you have one big Russia, which is always great, and everybody should be afraid of it. But the main thing is that Ukrainians never had royal family.
No.
So the small kingdoms in the Middle Ages, yes, there was Lviv kingdom, and I mean, Ukraine was part of Lithuanian kingdom and Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, etc. But from 15th century, 16th century, actually Ukrainians were choosing their leaders, who were called hetmans. Hetman is like headman, it's a Germanic word, who was first of all responsible for the army, but he was responsible for the territory, and he was like head of the state, because he was also controlling the diplomatic correspondence, sending embassies to Turkey or somewhere else. And what was specific for Ukraine, that every time the senior Cossacks would choose a new leader, another group of Cossacks would say in 2 days' time that he didn't do anything in 2 days, we should replace him. And so, I mean, Ukraine became like a motherland of anarchy.
Yes.
Because, I mean, every senior Cossack thought that he can influence the situation. In fact, actually, they could influence, and they did influence very often situations to the worst, by replacing bad hetman with even worse hetman, etc. Or having 3 hetmans at the same time. But this is how actually Ukrainian politics was created, because, I mean, even today, the best proof of this kind of mentality is the presence of more than 400 political parties registered in the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine.
That's a lot.
When a Ukrainian wants to join politics, he creates his own party, because he doesn't want to join somebody's party.
I heard of this,
He wants to have his own party, like his own house, his own garden, his own party.
We're not there yet in the Netherlands. We have a lot more now, but not that many yet. Okay, but you say there's the
Oh yes, and I didn't mention the third level.
The third level.
The third level is geopolitical, and it's obvious. And actually, Putin first announced 2.5 years ago that this is war not against Ukraine. This is the war against Western values, against USA and European Union on the territory of Ukraine. So this is actually a war of countries like North Korea, Venezuela, Iran, China, and Russia against European Union, America, Canada, Japan, and any other country which wants to remain a democratic state.
Yes. This is very interesting what you say here, because you write also very well about how this was a cultural war, a war for cultural dominance. And then you say that in 2004 and 2005, these Western values and the sort of Western culture, they really wanted to be part of it, or they pretended they wanted to be part of it. So they joined all the book fairs, and they sent all the Russian writers, and they really promoted the Russian culture here. And that was strategy.
Well, I mean, it was well financed, well planned, and it was acknowledged by the director of Hermitage Museum in Petersburg, Piotrovsky, who gave an interview after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, that the cultural policy of Russia in Europe and in the world in general was also a special military operation. But they were taken over not the territories, they were taken over the minds of people, they were taken over the information space. And I remember, I mean, there were lots of things which were very expensive, very important also for the West. I mean, like exhibitions of the Hermitage works in the Amsterdam Hermitage Museum, and presence in Pinacoteca in Munich, etc. But there were things which were tiny, small budget, and very annoying. For example, actually, I used to go every year for 2 months to give talks in German towns and cities, small towns. And every time I would come to a small town, there would be a poster, Don Cossack Choir sings tomorrow. And at some point I thought that I'm followed by Don Cossack choirs. Because the posters were the same, but obviously they were different choirs, which were singing in different churches in Germany. But I mean, I had a feeling there were hundreds of these choirs. So I mean, it was like grassroots cultural campaign.
Stalking choirs. Incredible. But there's, I want, because the West was really also with the choirs, but also with the literature, we were really open to it in a way. And I was wondering why that is, because I think on the one hand, here in the Netherlands and maybe in Western Europe, you have people still, some people, they think communism, you know, was it really that bad? And then talking about colonialism, we spoke about this a lot. I think, and I wonder what you think about that. We spoke about it a lot in this weekend. There's maybe some sort of Orientalism regarding Russia that is also, I think maybe it also for part has to do with a sort of Western feeling of superiority, and then there was a sort of longing almost for, these nice. Do you think that's true? Or
well, first of all, actually, intellectuals in every country, they are always anti-establishment. So they are looking for alternative. The alternative is somewhere else. Something experimental, exotic, magical.
Russia.
Yes. I mean, Russia, because if there were no Russia, I think China would become a country that would attract attention, and people would travel there and they would find something positive. But generally, I mean, there is a Russian myth about magical and difficult to explain Russian soul. I mean, there is another word for this, but this word is never used. The similar or the synonym of Russian soul is chaos. But chaos doesn't sound good. No. But Russian soul sounds sexy. So, I mean, something you don't understand, and it's noisy, it's bright, it can come, it can make a lot of party, etc. And its behavior is unpredictable. History is unpredictable because it was rewritten many times, and you never know which version is good or correct. And of course, I mean, it is charming people who are looking for an alternative. And here comes great Russian culture, because it's not just some kind of wild tribe from the jungles, which is exotic, but it's wild tribe from very cultured jungles with a lot of things to show, and which dances ballets excellently. So, I mean, there are lots of things which, when they're combined, they work as a special operation.
Yes.
It's just like, I mean, you go just under hypnotic influence when you approach this. I mean, you approach radiation, you get radiation. And then you fall in love with it. Yeah. And the effect is like, you know, when people join sects. So, I mean, many Russophiles, especially in Greece, in Italy, in Austria I met some, they become ardent defenders of Russian soul. So they think that actually they are now the owners of Russian souls because they learned Russian, because they love Dostoevsky, and they are representatives. So they are voluntarily ambassadors of Russian soul. And actually these were the main people to whom a lot of interest was addressed from Russia. So I mean, they are
it was a perfect match in that
advocates,
sense.
the attorneys. Yes.
They looked for a sect, and Russia gave them one. And then on the other hand, there was, of course, the idea of soft diplomacy. that and the way that the culture would come with doing trades, and if everybody would be trading with each other, and then nobody was going to get hurt.
No, I mean, in normal wild world, culture comes before politics. I mean, like this commonplace pictures, then when you come to an island inhabited by wild tribe, and you want to show them that you are not aggressive, you are not a danger, you start singing them your songs, or you dance for them, so that you start entertaining them. And then they stop being afraid of you. And then you send a politician who agrees how to trade and what to sell, what to buy. So, I mean, culture was always used as some kind of lubricant in the relations.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was never used so aggressively.
No.
And another example, if you go to Rome, if you go up Spanish stairs, there is a park, a beautiful park with lots of monuments to well-renowned writers. So every country gave a monument of their writer to this park. So you can see Balzac, I think. You can see some others, Hemingway, and you can see, I think, at least 3 writers. One of them Ukrainian, Gogol, but also Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. So actually, when you ask Russia to, if you want to give as a present a monument, they will give you 3. Because they know what does it mean to mark the territory. So, I mean, the territory between 3 authors belongs...
And one Ukrainian, because they see that as their own.
Yeah, well, because it is... because Gogol actually wrote, that his father wrote in Ukrainian.
And then?
And the son wanted to be accepted. And you wouldn't be accepted if you wrote in Ukrainian.
No.
And my own theory, actually, that there is a connection between today's war and Gogol.
Why?
Because Gogol, with his wonderful novels, especially when he was living in St. Petersburg, he created fashion among Russian rich people for everything Ukrainian. So after reading Gogol, suddenly the Russian tradesmen and aristocracy wanted to have Ukrainian servants, Ukrainian cooks, Ukrainian clothes, Ukrainian choirs. And this was time of serfdom. So, you could buy Ukrainians and ship them to St. Petersburg, and they would belong to you. So, I mean, Russians loved Ukrainians as pets and as servants, and they couldn't imagine life without this funny, strange people who sing so well. Yeah. And genetically, actually, Putin provoked this memory. So now Russians will not explain why they cannot imagine life without Ukraine, but they will just say that because Ukraine used to belong to Russian Empire, so it belongs to us.
Yes. He's also what you're saying is very important, I think, because he's so, and you mentioned it before already in this conversation, because he's so actively trying to change the history of Ukraine, saying it was invented by Lenin was one of the things that he did. And I was wondering, do you think the one who controls history is also controlling the present?
Well, in the world of uneducated people, yes. But even uneducated Russians who don't like Lenin, actually, they prefer Stalin, because Stalin was more bloody and more criminal. But what is interesting that they know also why Putin loves Peter the Great so much, because Peter the Great and his army, they defeated Ukrainian army of Hetman Mazepa, supported by the Swedish army of Karl XII near Poltava, and famous Poltava battle, about which Pushkin wrote a poem, and Byron wrote a poem, Mazepa. So, I mean, this is the history that you cannot rewrite. Yes, Ukrainians lost the war, lost Ukraine. Mazepa escaped to Bessarabia, to today's Moldova, and this was the end of this next attempt of Ukraine to become independent from Russia. But it means that actually Ukraine existed in 1709, and And 11 years later, Peter the Great he signed the first decree banning publication of religious texts in Ukrainian. So this is the official year of the beginning of the war against Ukrainian identity,
Yes.
1720. So Lenin was, I mean, the parents of Lenin were not born yet.
No.
And Lenin actually, he understood the difference between Ukrainians and Russians. He never trusted Ukrainians, and he never came to Kiev. I'm not sure he went at all to Ukraine. His sister, or both sisters, they lived in Kiev. There was a street of Ulyanovich, that's his real name, where the house stood, and maybe still there is a house where they lived. But he never came up, he never came, and he always was very suspicious about anything to do with Ukraine.
You said something very interesting in a side phrase. You said they love Stalin more because he's more criminal. And I think this is a very important notion also about our time. Because the people now, like, they loved Stalin maybe because it was more bloody, because it was more criminal. But if you see with the election of Trump, who is a criminal, Putin, who is a criminal, what is it that nowadays in Russia, but also you see it happening in other places, why do the people love the criminals?
Well, because they are people of action, because they can change things, because they can kill. And actually, I mean, I'm not sure about love for criminals in Europe. I don't think I observed it.
Maybe if you look at the
but
Polish
we had our own case when President Yanukovych was elected, who spent 2 times sentences in the prison. But he was loved by the ordinary voters because he was 2 meters high. He was just physically big.
It's attractive.
And tough. And this was something. And he came from Donbass. So actually, Donbass was the only region in Ukraine, and probably still, where the hierarchy of physical force is more important than hierarchy of intellectual power. And if we go into the Soviet history, 1970s, so there was a competition between communist leaders of Donbass and communist leaders of Dnipropetrovsk. And it's interesting that actually Dnipropetrovsk leaders would always win.
Why?
Well, because they were more intellectual,
yes.
and they were not relying on physical force. Leonid Brezhnev was from Dnipropetrovsk. The second president of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, from Dnipropetrovsk. Yulia Tymoshenko, whom you probably know because of the hairdo, from Dnipropetrovsk. So half of the Ukrainian elite comes from Dnipropetrovsk. And nobody was coming from Donetsk. So Donetsk actually was imposing this Yanukovych. They chose Yanukovych. Actually, it's clear who chose him. The most rich oligarch in Ukraine, Rinat Akhmetov, a Tatar from Donetsk. Definitely, I mean, he was financing Yanukovych to become more popular, and he created his image that he is a tough, he will do things in the country. And when he was elected, he started actually sending young people from Donbass to take state positions in different regions of Ukraine. And this looked like a repetition of 1945, 1950s, when the Western Ukraine became finally part of the Soviet Ukraine, and the local population was anti-Soviet, and the KGB at that time, and KVD, and the party was sending teachers, functionaries, prosecutors, police people from Donbass, from Russia, to clean up the territory of the Western Ukraine.
To take over the institutions. Thank you very much for explaining this. I want to speak a little bit also about your diaries. Because you've said many times before that you were not able to write fiction, and that's how but you want to write, of course, that you're a writer, and then the diaries came along. But I was wondering, in this not writing fiction, was this a mental thing? Was it a physical thing? Did you feel it was not appropriate to write fiction? What was it?
Well, it's a complex thing because first of all, actually, when you wake up and you understand that there is a war and people are killed and actually towns and houses destroyed, and you face the suffering of people around you. So you get a lot of very negative documentary information. Yes. So you wake up in different world where there is no fiction present because you don't need to fantasize about real death. And then when you start thinking about writing fiction, you understand that actually writing fiction as well as reading fiction is a pleasure. Mm-hmm. How can you get pleasure in the time when everybody suffers? And when you are on the run or you have to listen to the sirens, etc. So, I mean, it's a different world where fiction doesn't function. Poetry functions.
Why?
Poetry because it is short charge of positive, usually energy, because it can take you away for 2 minutes, because you can memorize it, because you can create it in your head and then tell it to your friends without writing it down if you have no possibility to write it down. Mm-hmm. And actually, in 2015, I went first time to the front lines after annexation of Crimea and beginning of the war in Donbass with Sergei Zhadan, Mariana Sadovskaya, and I think Luba Yakimchuk. So Sergei Zhadan is poet, first of all, and Luba were poets. And we had events for the soldiers. Mm-hmm. And first time I saw how they were listening to the poems, I couldn't believe them. I mean, they were crying. They were sitting with Kalashnikovs in the uniforms, and they were listening to the poems by Luba Yakimchuk, who was, she was a refugee from Donetsk herself. Mm-hmm. And they were crying. Because, it's like a psychological treatment. Mm-hmm. Because when you are at war, you are tensed. You don't have a moment to forget that you are at war. Mm-hmm. And the poetry gives you this moment. Mm-hmm. Sort of the poetry takes you away to your home, to your loved ones, yes. to your dreams, etc. And that's why I think poetry became the most important in the first months of the war. And then when soldiers got used to the fact that the war will not stop immediately, they wanted to read non-fiction about Ukrainian history. Mm-hmm. And they were asking their relatives and friends to send them books about Ukrainian history. And so there was a boom in the publishing houses. At the same time, publishing houses were bombed, the print works were destroyed. My publisher lost 12 tons of paper and print works in Dergachin, Kharkiv region, and several days later, actually, his publishing house was all without doors and without windows, and it is still empty. So people who work for him, they work from home. But generally, it was like, there was a feeling that Russians found out the secret weapon of Ukrainian soldiers. And they started, again, fighting against culture, because culture keeps you together. Mm-hmm. It creates the society, community. It gives you the context, cultural context in which you live, where you can quote your favorite books and films, mm-hmm. and you immediately are considered one of ours, because you are talking about the same quotation.
Tatiana Ogakova was telling me a fantastic story about it, how she goes to the frontiers, to small villages that have almost been abandoned. And at first they came there to read poetry, and now everybody says, no, I want to read my poem. And everybody's making poetry and wanting to read it, and wanting to share it.
Poetry becomes medicine because lots of soldiers start writing poetry. Mm-hmm. And actually, a lot of Ukrainian war prisoners who were in Russian camps, they were writing poetry there, and they were not able to write it down, so they were just memorizing and passing on to their friends. And when people come from when exchanged, some come, some don't come. So they come back to Ukraine, they write down what they remember from their friends who remained, yes. And another story, which is in the book Our Daily War, Russia is using poetry as a torture. Oh. So, in some camps, the Ukrainian war prisoners were forced not only to learn by heart Russian hymn, but to learn by heart anti-Ukrainian poems, including one which was at that time infamous. It was written by one pro-Russian girl from Poltava, and this is a poem which begins with the words, "Forgive us, dear Russians." So actually, I mean, and the problem is like, if you learned in prison by force something, you will remember it all your life. So I mean, this torture has a continuation. I mean, like, I remember the poems I was forced to learn in the school. It's the same effect. So you cannot get rid of it.
That's horrible, really. And then you did not start writing poetry, but you started writing a diary.
Well, in fact, actually, in the last year, I wrote 3 poems in Ukrainian, yes. But I put them online on Facebook, but...
not published yet?
Not yet. But I mean, I used to write poetry in 3 languages until the age of 24. I wrote in English, in Ukrainian, and Russian. And I loved the fact that actually each language dictates the atmosphere and the energy of the poem. So all my poems in English were depressive. All my poems in Russian were full of absurdities, and all the poems in Ukrainian were funny. So now, I don't know, I mean, probably I feel like I can write poems in Ukrainian now more naturally than in English or in Russian. Because, I mean, with Russian it's very difficult because it's my mother tongue. I write fiction. I mean, I managed to, last November, to finish 3rd novel about 1919, this Silver Bone, the sequel. And I thought that I would start immediately the next novel about the past, and I didn't manage. But I will try my best, yeah. But still, somehow, I don't think it is language that stops me. It's just, again, the situation, the psychological state of mind. But of course, I mean, I know every time I say publicly that I still write in Russian, I get glances and I get messages.
Very angry messages, I can imagine. Maybe one more question about writing before I'm going to ask you to read something, because you said to me that you were, of course, and now as well, that you're writing the novel about the 1990s. And that is a work of fiction, but you said I can write it because it's so far in the past. How does that work?
Well, it was happening more than 100 years ago, the events that I describe, but they are very similar to what is happening now, because after October Revolution of 1917, Red Army, Bolsheviks, wanted to take over all of Russian Empire and create a communist state. Ukraine announced its independence in 1918. The independence was supported by German army. And the last Hetman Skoropadsky practically was helped by the German army. German garrison was staying in Ukraine until 1919. And he was trying to create independent Ukraine with some kind of connection, political connection with Russia, with Moscow, not to upset Lenin and everybody else. But from 1918, officially, the civil war started. I mean, in Russian history, it is civil war, and on Russian territory, it was civil war between the Red Army and the White Army. So the Tsarist army and the Bolsheviks, yeah. In Ukraine, 7 armies were involved in 3 different wars. Because we had Ukrainian civil war since another famous poet, essayist, and politician from Ukrainian history, Simon Petlura, had his own army, and he was fighting against Skoropadsky because he wanted to create completely independent Ukraine, as far away politically from Russia as possible. The first and the biggest in the world anarchic army was created in Poltava by Nestor Makhno with 35,000 soldiers, and later they had 80,000. And Makhno first was supporting independent Ukraine, but I'm not sure, probably he was supporting more Petlura than Skoropadsky, because Skoropadsky was connected with the German army. But then he joined Red Army, and he was fighting against Petlura. And then the Red Army, the Bolsheviks destroyed his army, and in the end he was killed, yeah. And there is a big untold story about Polish army in this war, because Polish army occupied Kiev in 1920. And Kiev was occupied by Bolsheviks 4 times between 1918 and 1921. And I want to say that they came, the Red Army, with the same level of violence as the Russian army approached Kiev and occupied Bucha, Gostomel, and Borodyanka and other towns, Mashun. And what was also incredible, that on the 10th of October 2023, the same streets were bombed by today's Russian army as they were bombed by General Muravyov, by the Red Army in 1918.
Over 100 years ago.
Including actually the building of the old parliament. So Kiev inhabitants, they started joking that today's Russian army has old maps.
Yes.
Because the new parliament is in the other place.
But then why do you write about the war that is more than 100 years ago, the wars and the fighting, and not about the present day fighting?
Well, for me, the war of 1918, 1921 was war for Ukrainian independence that was lost by Ukrainians because of the split, because they were not united. Kiev at that time was a very dangerous and very unusual place. Every district had its own political view, its own structure, its own population. I mean, like today we are all consolidated, we have one enemy. So we know what we want. In 1918, 1919, nobody knew who will come and stay forever. So because, I mean, the Germans would come, the Russian Denikin's army, the White Army would come, the Red Army would come, the Poles, the bandits, there were lots of actually, I mean, any gang of bandits could call themselves Machno army, and they were small wars, which are still not studied by the historians. And there is a forest not far away from Kiev, which is called Holodny Yar, the cold ravine. In this forest, there were 14 different independent Ukrainian republics.
Incredible,
So, I mean,
yes.
And of course, I mean, at the same time, we had Donetsk Krivorovsky Republic. So, I mean, we had bigger republics and tiny republics. So any village could announce its independence. And this was very typical Ukrainian.
And you want the people to know this.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, and I started writing because I received a present, a box of the VCK documents, real documents from the first Secret Service of the Soviet Union, with the cases connected with Kiev and surrounding of Kiev. And funny to say, when I was 18, one of my first short novels was about 1918, and it was called "Deklassirovanные" in Russian, which means that not belonging to the upper classes. It was not declassified like files, but it was like people who don't belong to the proper population. Yeah, and it was about the same period, about the same violence, but it was more humoristic because at that time I had more wild sense of humor.
I don't think so. I think this book is actually also really, really funny. Will you read something for us?
Well, maybe first I should explain what is this book about, because when the war started in February 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, I mean, lots of people were writing already fiction about the events, and I was asked if I'm going to write about what is happening, and I said no, because I will write only when it is over, and maybe 10 years later, when there is a distance to understand it better. Yeah, and in 2015 I went first time to the frontline zone with my colleagues, and then I went 2 times more, and by that time there were 200 books, non-fiction books, diaries, notes, written by the soldiers and volunteers about Donbass war. Nothing about Crimea. There was nothing about the next Crimea, but only about what was happening in Donbass. And I just thought that was strange, because I mean, so many civilians remained in Donbass, and people are just sitting at home, waiting for the war to go away, and the war comes, more close and more close, and nobody talks about them. So I decided to give voice to civilians who decided to stay at home when the war came. And another thing, I realized that the front line was 430 kilometers, and there was gray zone of the same length. Gray zone is a territory between positions of separatists and Russians and Ukrainian army. And in some places this gray zone was very narrow, like 300 meters, 500 meters, where snipers could shoot at each other. And there were territories like 5-7 kilometers apart. And there were villages inside the gray zones where there was no police, no pharmacy, no shops, no gas, no electricity. And in every village there would be usually all the people who remained. And part of Avdiivka, it's a bigger town in Donbass, was for a long time in the gray zone, but this was industrial part. It was actually the territory with factories, plants, and I don't know if there were people living there or not. It's not clear. I mean, it's all destroyed now. But I understood that actually there were hundreds of people who were living in this zone, and there were dozens of villages.
Yes.
And I decided to write about it. And then when I started doing research, I found out that there is a lady in Kharkiv who organized a newspaper for the gray zone. And because actually these villages were visited by Ukrainian volunteers who were bringing food and medicine, but also by Russian volunteers who were coming from separatist side. And this is quite incredible, because I mean the people in the villages, they needed everything, but they were extremely afraid of any visitor. So they had to smile neutrally to everybody, not knowing who they are talking to. And this lady managed to publish a newspaper once a month with no politics and no information about the war. It was only about the changes in the pension laws or the popular medicine, how to help yourself with herbs instead of medicine. And she was asking Ukrainian volunteers to take this and to live in the villages. And it was considered safe, because if the volunteers were caught by the separatists or by the Russians, they wouldn't be able to accuse them that they are bringing propaganda. I don't know if it helped anybody or not, but anyway, this was the principle. And for 1 year at least, I mean, this newspaper was printed and delivered to the villages. And this was the only source of information, but it was not information about what is happening. No. And of course, I mean, people there didn't know what is happening because there was no electricity, no mobile network.
No news.
No news.
Nothing.
And that's why I decided actually to write this book. And first I wanted to use a real village as the setting for the novel. But I couldn't find this village, because the villages in Donbass are huge. They are like towns in central Ukraine. So I mean 5,000 people, 10,000 people, 15,000 people, and they are usually situated next to the mine or next to a big factory. So it's very different structure. But I found on the Google map the place where I could build this village, because I wanted to have a village with 2 streets and one small, I don't know, Geshen, or a small connecting street. And it's a story about 2 young retired people, because in Donbass, usually miners, they get retired when they are 45, 49 because of the illnesses, Solikos, other problems. And these are 2 guys who grew up in the village on parallel streets, on Shevchenko and Lenin Street, who hated each other from the very childhood. And now there are only 2 remained in the village. If to say briefly, this is a village about 2 men, 3 women, 6 beehives, and 1 war. But the main character is beekeeper, and I decided that he should be beekeeper because beekeepers are always considered wise people, not educated but wise, who understand nature, who are very friendly, who are almost doctors, because they know how to use byproducts of the honey of the beekeeping to help with the health. And they are never aggressive. Even when they drink, they remain peaceful.
You cannot be aggressive if you hold peace.
And also, maybe you don't know that there is a fashion is less talked about now in Ukraine, to sleep on the beehives.
Really?
Yeah. And actually, and this is a reality, and even President Yanukovych loved to sleep on the beehive. And I think this kind of invention comes from Donbass, because Donbass was full of beekeepers. And what happens actually, you lie on the beehives, like they're put together like a bed, and you sleep, you fall asleep, and listening by your body to vibration of the bees, because the bees are actually all the time, even if in the beehive, they move their wings because they create the temperature, needed temperature by their movement.
This was maybe also in the newspaper.
Sorry?
This could have been in the newspaper. I think that it's good for you to lie on the bees.
Yep.
Yep.
And so this is from the beginning, from the chapter 6. So the story begins in the winter, and it begins as a story of two men who live in this village with no electricity and nothing. But the village is visited, actually. I mean, the main character is visited by a Ukrainian soldier who is keeping an eye on the village across the field. And because the house of Sergei, of the beekeeper, is facing Ukrainian positions, and the house of Pashka, of his enemy, or frenemy, who became almost friend, is facing Russian positions. So he goes to Russians and brings vodka and bread from there. After several calm, windless days, came an unusually dark evening. It didn't come of its own accord, but was brought about by the agitation of the sky, which was invisible from the wintry gloom below. Up there, heavy clouds pushed aside their lighter neighbors and began to shed fluffy snow. These new flakes fell to the ground, which was plastered with old snow that had grown hard in the dry wind. Sergeich, yawning, fed his stove a new portion of long flame coal, then pinched out a yellow church candle with 2 fingers. It seemed he had done what had to be done before bedtime. All that remained was to pull the blanket up to his ears and fall asleep until the morning or until the cold woke him. Yet the silence, thanks to the snowfall, felt somehow incomplete. And when silence is incomplete, there arises willy-nilly the desire to complete it. But how? Sergeich had long ago grown used to the sound of distant bombardments, which had become an integral part of silence. But now the snowfall, a much less frequent guest, had blocked out that sound with its rustling. Silence, of course, is an arbitrary thing, a personal oral phenomena that people adjust for themselves. In earlier days, Sergei's silence was not unlike the silence of others. It easily absorbed the drone of an airplane up in the sky or the nighttime chirp of a cricket that had hopped in through an opened window. All quiet sounds that cause no irritation and don't turn one's head eventually fuse into silence. So it was with Sergeevich's peacetime silence, and so it became with his wartime silence, in which military sounds suppressed and displaced peaceful, natural ones, but in due course also nestled under the wings of silence and ceased to draw attention to themselves. Now Sergeich lay in bed, seized by a strange anxiety because of the snowfall, which seemed too loud. Instead of drifting off to sleep, he lay there and thought. And once again, his thoughts returned to the dead man in the field. But this time, Sergei's thoughts hastened to bring him cheer. suggesting that the dead man would soon be hidden from view. After all, snow as heavy as this would cover everything up for a good long time, until the springtime thaw. And in spring, all would change. Nature would awake, birds' song would drown out the cannon fire, because the birds would be nearby, while the cannons would stay over there, far away. And only occasionally, for some unknown reason, maybe out of drunkenness or drowsiness, would the gunners accidentally drop 1 or 2 shells on little Starohorodivka, once a month at most. And these shells would fall where nothing living remained, on the cemetery, the churchyard, or the long deserted and windowless building of the old kolkhoz administration. And if the war did continue into spring, Sergeich would leave the village to Pashka and take his bees, all 6 hives, to where there was no war, where the fields weren't pock-marked by craters, but covered in buckwheat and wildflowers, where you could walk without fear through woods, across meadows and along country roads, where there were lots of people, and even if they didn't smile at you, life would still seem easier and warmer, simply because there were so many of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's incredible how you describe how the sounds of war replace the sounds of nature, and how you can get, in a way, also used to that. But I want to talk with you about the long-term effect of this, when the sounds of war become a normality, when war becomes a normality. What is the effect on that, do you think, long-term for Ukrainian society?
Well, I mean, the children who are 11 years old, they never lived a day in peaceful Ukraine. So we are talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Mm-hmm. Adult people and teenagers, they learned how to live during the war. Mm-hmm. They have habits that they will remain with them until the end of the days. So, in fact, actually, what I notice sometimes, not often, I hear abroad a sound which associates with the war.
Do you have an example?
Well, I mean, it can be very, I mean, it's like a buzzing of a drone, of Iranian mm-hmm. drone, mm-hmm. or something like this. I mean, I heard in Europe a couple of times, maybe it was also the same kind of engine. But then immediately you forget that you are abroad. Mm-hmm. You just like, for a second, you get concentrated and you decide where to move, what to do. So I remember that in 2015, and it was only several months into the war, I went to Severodonetsk on the border with Russia, Lugansk region, and I talked to kids which were like 7, 8, 10 years old, and we were listening to the cannonite artillery fire, which was 7 kilometers away, mm-hmm. That where the front line was. And they were telling me which kind of shells were exploding, because there were several different sounds. And actually, I mean, like project of Anton here.
Yes.
It's. I mean, when I saw this video, I immediately remembered the Severodonetsk and how the kids actually could easily differentiate mm-hmm. sounds.
It was the work of Anton Varga of Open Group that we had here. And regarding that work, and also maybe regarding your books, we spoke a lot about culture and transmission. So people who have this experience, kids that have no other experience than being in the war, and the ones who don't have that experience within Ukraine, between Ukraine and other countries. Do you think art brings, or maybe culture can bring these two closer together, and how close?
Well, I mean, Ukrainians who are refugees, they are ambassadors of war. Mm-hmm. They are not ambassadors of Ukraine. When they understand that they can be ambassadors of Ukraine, they start functioning as ambassadors, because, I mean, they bring their pain, they bring their problems, they bring memories of the houses that don't exist anymore. So actually, they are bringing a trauma, and usually they are well treated. So I mean, this trauma turns into something else. But in general, I mean, this trauma will stay with them forever. And when I talked to local people in Donbass in 2015, I was trying to understand why they are not escaping from the war. Some were escaping later or when it was extremely dangerous. But I understood that people who remained, they were choosing between two fears. Fear to be killed at home and fear to become a refugee, not knowing what will happen to you. And for older people in Donbass, it was like more natural to be killed at home. In the village where on the graveyard the relatives lie in the graves, etc. So, and I think the main issue after the war will be the relationship between Ukrainians who remained in Ukraine and those who left.
What is the difficulty that lies there?
Sorry?
What is the difficulty that lies there, do you think?
Well, because there is a bitterness. Bitterness among the refugees. I met many refugees in Europe. And actually, I was in touch for a long time with a group of ladies from Drushkivka, from Donetsk. I was fascinated by their stories because they drove in a half-broken car, Italian car, and I don't know, I mean, because the car was Italian, they decided to go to Italy. But the car died in Italy.
Oh.
So completely, it was impossible to repair. And a Frenchman in his car pulled them with this car into France, to Montpellier. And then they were brought to a school in Montpellier. The school administration organized a camp in the sports hall. That's where I met them, yes. And we were in touch, not by emails, by messengers. But then what happened, they were given a free big apartment in a village, in French village, like 40 kilometers from Montpellier. There were two ladies in their 70s and I think three ladies in 40s and 50s. They were not going to learn French. Nobody understood them. They were writing me that it's impossible to live there. They were given money, but they couldn't buy anything. Well, I mean, they were buying, but I mean, every shopping in the local supermarket was like a trauma. And then they stopped answering my messages. So I assume probably they returned to Ukraine, or maybe somebody told them to go to Poland, where it is easier. Because it's another Slavic language, yeah. But I mean, these people will never recover. No, and probably, I mean, they will not be able to go back. No, because I mean, Donbass doesn't exist anymore as territory for life.
I find it important also to talk about this because it's another way in which Putin, of course, tries to destroy, or Russia tries to destroy, Ukraine. By doing this to the country. Like, this is also really, of course, another way in which Putin or Russia tries to destroy Ukraine.
Well, in fact, actually, he started the war to defend inhabitants of Donbass from Ukrainians who were apparently attacking them, which is, I mean, I think even Russians understood that this is a complete lie. Nobody was actually... Nobody, even politically, was influenced in Donbass because, and this is one of the problems that the politicians from Kiev, they never had control over Donbass or over Crimea, and they didn't work properly as politicians. They didn't care about integration of different regions. So I mean, the country existed almost without power. I mean, Donbass was run by local mafia, local oligarchs. Crimea was run first by Russian communists, and then by Crimean mafia, and then this Crimean mafia was replaced with the Russian secret services, etc.
Talking about the mafia, I think maybe the last thing I would really like to discuss with you before we go to the questions of the audience is your first book. because it's one of my favorite books. I love it. And it's really funny. But what you write about in this book, it plays in the 90s. And it's about a man who comes home one day with a penguin. And he got this penguin from the zoo because they could not take care of the small animals anymore. But what I find so interesting, also relating to something that Volodymyr Yermolenko, the philosopher, I heard him say, when he was speaking about the Stalin show trials in the 1930s, he said, in order to prevent the rebellion, you have to first invent the rebellion. So you have to create, as a dictator, you have to create your own enemies, and you have to punish them before, to set an example. And then the fantasy of fear becomes even stronger than the reality. And I think you do that, how you write about fear in this book, because in the end, or not in the end, but the main character writes these obituaries about people. And at first his boss tells him, you have to write about this person, and then that person dies. But then he starts doing it also quite randomly. You don't know really who controls who will die. And this fear is like, it spreads, but you never know who the dictator is going to kill. Long story short, what you describe here in Ukraine, in Ukrainian society in the 90s, while reading this, I thought, Russia still has this system, completely. This system of fear, this system of the dictator who decides who will get to go. But Ukraine outgrew this completely. It's a completely different society you describe here. And that's incredible. So I was wondering, maybe for the last answer, how did Ukraine do this? Because it's outstanding.
Well, Russia always praised their criminal culture. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, criminal culture became almost mainstream culture. And if you know the word chanson, I mean, it's a beautiful French word which means simply song in French. In Russian, this word means actually a romantic song about criminal life. So, I mean, radio chanson in Russia and in Ukraine, they were always broadcasting the songs, romantic songs about criminal life, criminal values, etc. But in Ukraine, actually, criminals never became heroes. In Russia, they are respected, they love them, mm-hmm. They make TV series about them. There is a very popular series which is called Bandits, St. Petersburg of Bandits, etc. Mm-hmm. In Ukraine, we don't have this culture because Ukrainians are individualists and they don't like criminals, actually. They want to have a normal society, mm-hmm. a stable society. At the same time, remaining free there and deciding for themselves, yeah. So, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the criminal situation was in Ukraine as bad as in Russia for at least 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then Ukraine went a different way, actually, because, I mean, we had small entrepreneurs, a very active movement, in time when actually in Russia there were huge gangs created for protection racket, etc. Mm-hmm.
And it just never happened?
No.
Do you think the success of Ukraine do you think there is a lot of jealousy? Well,
it's not a jealousy. I think it was a fear among Russian elite that Ukraine is given bad example of political freedom. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, like Putin is in power for 23 years. Mm-hmm. In that time, we had 5 different presidents. In Ukraine, actually, you elect a president in order to hate him, mm-hmm. and to consider him guilty for what is going wrong. In Russia, they choose a Tsar.
Yep.
And they don't blame him, they blame his assistants. And so it's completely different attitude. And of course, the fact that political life in Ukraine, although very chaotic, but it's so abundant, so different. And the Russian Federation came back to the Soviet one-party system. So, I mean, now it is Единая Россия, United Russia of Putin. So if you are not a member of this party, you are not a state employee. In Ukraine, I mean, we have, for example, as a state employee in the administration of the radio and television, we have Bogdan Chervak, who is a leader of Ukrainian Nationalistic Party, which never could make it to parliament.
That's good.
So you have people with completely opposite views working for the state and tolerated by others. Yeah. And it is impossible to imagine in Russia.
Yeah, it's a true democracy in that sense.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? Yes, I'm going to you. Sorry, I'm going to Richard the microphone.
Thank you very much for the talk. I have a question about a place of Russian language in modern Ukraine. So what is the place of Russian language now, and where do you see it, and whether you see Russian language anywhere in Ukraine, let's say in 10, 20 years? Thank you.
Well, we had before 2014, probably 40% of population was Russian-speaking in Ukraine. Majority of Russian speakers were in the east, Donbass, and south of Ukraine, including Odessa, for example, and Dnipro, and Zaporizhia, and Kryvyi Rih, where Zelensky was born. A lot of Russian speakers were killed in Mariupol in Donbass at the beginning of the Donbass war and in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. I think the first refugees from Ukraine were also mostly Russian speakers, so including displaced people, actually. I mean, now you have much more Russian speakers in Western Ukraine, where Russian was almost not spoken before, because the refugee settled there. But in 20 years' time, probably there will be maybe 10–15% of Russian speakers in the areas where Russian was historically used as inter-ethnic language. Like, for example, in Bessarabia, Odessa region, where Moldovan village is next to Bulgarian village, is next to Slovak village, or old Russian old believers. I mean, they speak between themselves Russian, but in the households they speak sometimes Moldovan, sometimes other languages. The Russian language is not taught anywhere. So education is only in Ukrainian, which means that the younger generation of Ukrainian citizens, they are all, even if they are Russian-speaking in the family, they are bilingual. So they speak also Ukrainian. And I think there will be more and more Ukrainian speakers. But situation today is, of course, as you know, difficult for Russian speakers, because Russian language is almost officially called a language of the enemy. But the groups or the people who are actively campaigning against use of Russian language, they are not related to the state. This is a part of what do you call it? Civil society activists who are practically, for example, controlling bookshops, and bookshops don't want to sell books in Russian, even if they're published in Ukraine. You can publish books in Russian in Ukraine, it's not banned, but the bookshops will not take it, but you can sell online. So online bookshops are selling books in Russian, yeah. But generally, it will become a niche language in the future. I mean, because there are still writers and poets who write in Russian. They are keeping low profile because they don't want to provoke any additional hate. They have some small events like kvartirniki or sort of. So I mean, it will become a niche culture, and in the end, probably people who were fighting against Russian will be tired to fight against what remains from Russian language culture in Ukraine, it will not be important at all, and it will be ignored on the official level. But it's not a problem because, like Hungarian ethnic culture in Ukraine was ignored for 34 years. It exists. I mean, there are 60 writers and poets who write in Hungarian. There are writers who write in Gagauz language. So, I mean, it will be a minority culture, but it will be less visible because of stigma. Yeah.
You explained very much how the KGB could be recognized because you could not remember their faces. How is the FSB? Is there a description of them? And my second part of the question is, Ukraine must have the most experience with misinformation and propaganda by Russia. What can we learn from you? How did you fight it as Ukrainians?
Well, I mean, the propaganda is the most effective when it is used on social media. So actually, Russians create memes or posts which provoke a very negative reaction in Ukrainian society, and Ukrainians start posting it. Especially it's about bad news from the front, corruption in the Ukrainian elite, which exists, but it is actually the posts about corruption and about the corrupt leadership and hopeless Zelensky, etc. I mean, I think most of them are produced in Russia and then shared by Ukrainians who love to hate. Yeah, and I mean, you just should learn how not to react to this. Yes, and regarding faces, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if I met FSB people or not, but I assume that people on the lower level who employ by social media Ukrainians to work for FSB, they are just probably like KGB people, yeah. But definitely they have a lot of clever people in Europe and abroad. And hardly you will recognize them until there is a proof that somebody is working for FSB. I mean, like there were two families recently deported, one deported from Brazil, one from Spain. So they were Spanish and Brazilian families, officially. They spoke Portuguese and Spanish with no accent. And even their children, who were teenagers, did not know that the parents are FSB people.
I have another question over here.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much for your good remarks, actually. My first question is about, you mentioned this is also a war of culture. So there are 120,000 Ukrainians in Netherlands, I think. What you advise for the Ukrainians to preserve their culture? This includes also your experiences, because you mentioned you have been in Germany or any other European countries. What a good practices that you have seen for the people living in Netherlands. This is the first. And the second is, yes, the picture is, we have all witnessed, yeah, there's an evil and people of Ukraine trying to defend themselves against the evil. But what have you learned in this process, learning from history, learning from the mistakes? When we defeat the evil and rebuild Ukraine again, then you can say we'll never repeat that mistakes. Did you learn anything from your mistakes also? The two questions.
Well, I think that the phrase that people are learning on the mistakes of previous generations is false. People are not learning because, I mean, the mistakes are repeated and they are unavoidable. I mean, it's quite probably a horrible thing to say, but I can imagine actually fascists coming to power in Austria or in Romania or in Hungary. Yeah. If they are not there yet. No. So actually, and it happens when the majority of the population is happy. When life is stable, the politics become a business of an elite, of small group, who decide what to do. And then actually people stop voting or vote for populists and they lose control. So it can happen anywhere. And about Ukrainian refugees, well, there are two main types of Ukrainian refugees. Those who come abroad and they look for other Ukrainians to get united, to help each other, to join different associations and groups, to get connected with local people. And there are Ukrainians, refugees, who are hiding from other Ukrainians and trying to assimilate as quick as possible. So those who are actually connecting to other Ukrainians, to Ukrainians who settled abroad before, they are becoming very active, and they help to create Ukrainian Sunday schools for kids. They ask their friends from Ukraine to send Ukrainian books for children. They are aware of what is happening in Ukrainian politics, in Ukrainian culture, and this is the positive way. So I know at least 4 or 5 big groups like Association of Ukrainians in Bordeaux in France. They exist already for 20 years, and now they became much more active because of the new members, new refugees. I know in San Diego a huge group of Ukrainians of the descendants of the immigrants from 1920s who are working together with the Ukrainians who moved to San Diego, California after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and who are welcoming now the new refugees, yes. And they have even a small Ukrainian museum in Bilbao Park. If you know San Diego, it's like every nation or every group, ethnic group, can have and run their own small museum, cultural center in the park. So there is a Czech Republic, there is a Polish house, and there is a Ukrainian house where Ukrainian volunteers every weekend are telling everybody about Ukrainian culture, Ukraine, doing concerts and things like this, but this is probably the best example. So, I mean, now, since we have 5-6 million Ukrainians, new Ukrainians abroad, of course, it's a big power to promote Ukraine and to help those Ukrainians who are in Ukraine, who live in Ukraine. And I hope that majority of Ukrainians will remain Ukrainians, will not try to hide, to assimilate and to disappear as a Ukrainian, ex-Ukrainian citizen, yeah.
But to celebrate the culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. It was a privilege to be speaking to you, and I just loved how you share your love for literature and history while also being so open about all the horrible things that are going on. Your books are for sale. Maybe you will sign them for the people. Yes, that's fantastic. And I thought it would be nice because the artwork I'm sitting in front is from the Crimean artist Nikita Kravtsov.
Who is here.
Who is here.
Stand up, stand up.
And he has been working in our Pleinzaal for the last 4 days on a new work that's finished. So if you don't have any plans, please come with us and have a drink over there when we go out. And maybe Nikita will say a few things if he wants to. What is else there to say? Not much for now. Just thank you. And I look forward to having a drink with you all. And thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And please read books about Ukraine. First non-fiction and then fiction. And the non-fiction is brilliant now. It is available in Dutch. There's Serhii Plokhy, Timothy Snyder, and Applebaum, who was here. I mean, you should know the history of Ukraine in order to understand the reasons of this war and the reasons for the hate of Putin. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.